I got a few people just coming in here. Hi there, I'm Baz Coody. I'm the track producer for this particular session with Bobbi Caggianelli, who's with Collibra, and she'll be talking about data governance, best practices for getting started. Just some housekeeping rules. This is live streamed as we speak, and there are questions which can be asked online if you wanted to do that. Bobbi will go in for about, leave about 10 minutes at the end. Q&A. Please raise your hand. I'll bring the mic around and ask your questions. Over to you, Bobbi.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining me virtually and those of you that are in the room. So my name is Bobbi Caggianelli. I am a sales engineering manager with Collibra. So what we're going to talk about today are really the people and the process side of data governance. There'll be very little discussion of tooling because as anyone who has been part of a technical process knows, you need the people and the process for the tool to work appropriately for you. So that's what we're going to lean into today. As your speaker, I do have my MS in Business Analytics. Just finished that a couple of years ago. I do have a case study in A Practitioner's Guide to Data Governance, which was a collaboration with the State University of New York. They put together a practitioner's guide with case studies by different verticals. And I did spend 5 years building a data governance practice at a large financial services institution in Kansas. And I was doing that when the opportunity to join Collibra came along. So I'm guessing you can tell where I landed when I was doing my tool selection. But I think it's different when you're an actual practitioner that then goes and starts working in the technology world, because I know the challenges that you face when you're trying to build a governance practice. And it's so much more than just buying a tool and ingesting your metadata. It really is around a cultural shift within the entire organization and how they treat data and how they prioritize the use of data, both from the side of data as a liability and the side of data as an asset. Everybody has been talking about data as an asset, but are we really doing that yet? I started out in the governance journey as a Six Sigma black belt. When you think about driving process improvement, there's a lot of process improvement that needs to happen around data in virtually every organization I have ever been to. So if you're like me, you were sitting at your desk one day and a leader came over and said, we need to do data governance. I was working on other process improvement projects and my boss came over and said, for your master black belt project, you're going to stand up enterprise-wide data governance. And I said, great, what's that? I had no idea, no background, was nowhere on my roadmap. So it's, where do I start? I have no idea where to get started with that. So here's what I did. And I'll tell you what worked well, and I'll tell you what didn't work well, because I think often we learn the most from other people's failures than we do from their successes. So start with assess your current state. You don't know what to fix if you don't know what your as is at the moment. So I sat down and I didn't just go to IT and say, what does our data pipeline look like? What is our data flow? What are our data sources? That would have given me an extremely myopic view of the data ecosystem of my organization. I sat down with the subject matter experts of all of our departments and asked them, what data are you using? Where does it come from? What kind of work are you doing around cleansing it or wrangling it if you need to? I found so much shadow IT just by sitting down and having those conversations. Oh, well, I have this Access database that I spun up, and I'm taking a raw feed, and I'm putting it in there, and I'm doing all this manipulation and massaging, and I'm like, whoa, we have a data warehouse. We have all that right here for you. Why are you doing all this work? Well, that data's not right, and I know it's not right. Well, have you done anything to remediate that? Oh, I'm just used to doing this. So the amount of information that I gained just by sitting down with individual contributors, not the leaders of those departments, but the people that were the true subject matter experts of that data and how it was being used, was so much larger than what I got when I first looked at our data landscape. So that was really key. Vendor data. I don't know that there's anyone here that doesn't outsource at least some piece of your business or bring in data from some third party. Where is it coming from? Where is it getting stored? Is it of quality? What are your SLAs with your vendors, not just around delivery of that data file, but the quality of the data file? So the completeness of the data file. I had a vendor once send us an empty file and said they met the SLA because the file was in our SFTP site by the prescribed time. It was empty, but they met the SLA. So, a lot of those, find the entirety of your data ecosystem, and you really need to do a lot of digging around that. This was probably a 4-month process, going around to all of the departments and just finding where it lives, who's using it, who's doing what with it. The next thing you're going to need to do is gain support for the governance initiative. And in a lot of companies, you either have a really strong top-down is in favor and bottom-up doesn't want to do it, or vice versa. So how do you build that consensus that doing data governance is something that is a priority for my organization? We should invest in this. From the top-down perspective, anytime you can link the data initiative to a corporate level initiative that they're driving, you're golden. Case in point for mine, we had one product line that we were experiencing attrition on, and we didn't know why. And so they wanted us to build a predictive model to say which of these customers that bought this particular product are most likely to have attrition. And let's start doing outreach before that happens. That's great. We don't have any data around that. We don't have any data around the people that we experienced attrition with in the last year to be able to build that model. I don't know where they lived. I don't know what states. I don't know what their age was. I don't know, and think this is retirement type products. So is there a commonality in age, location, market conditions that cause this attrition? We didn't have the data to be able to build that model. That helped me say, but if we had a data governance program where we had captured all of this metadata and we could massage that, we could build you these predictive models. But I can't predict off of nothing. I can't predict from air. I'm not that good. I'm not a psychic. So that was really useful to be able to build the top-down approach. If you can quantify the cost of bad data, we had overpaid sales reps by over $1 million when our vendor that manages our commission system, it was a multi-tenant system. They changed the commission schedules for one company, accidentally changed ours. We didn't catch it for 6 months. And we were overpaying these reps. Now, if you know anybody in sales, are they going to raise their hand and say, hey, you overpaid me? Right, Russ? You would totally do that, right? So, and these were not captive agents. They were allowed to sell the products of any retirement plan group. So if we pull that money back from them that we overpaid, what are the odds that they just say, well, I'm just not going to sell your product anymore? So we had to write that off as a cost of doing business. So $1 million write-off is a really good way to say, hey, if we were to spend a little bit of time and effort, have some tooling, have some resources around this, we could prevent that from happening. Great way to get your funding. And build business and technical sponsorship. You want not just a CIO, not just a CTO, and not just the CDO driving this. One of my primary champions was our CFO. So if you can get the business on board as well as the technical, you're way ahead of the game. You're way ahead of the game. Now, from the bottom-up perspective, when I met with those subject matter experts, I did not say, oh, we're going to start doing data governance, and you're going to need to be a steward, and you're going to need to give 15 hours a week to writing definitions and to enriching metadata. That would have been an immediate, I have a full-time job already, thank you very much. Talk to them about their pain points around data. How many hours a week do you spend trying to wrangle data? How many hours a week do you spend cleansing data? Especially your data scientists, if you think about that is a high dollar resource. And usually when I talk to data scientists, they say they spend 60% of the time wrangling and cleansing data. That is a lot of money spent on high value, high intelligence resources that could be better spent in them actually doing the modeling that you hired them to do. So talk to them about how much time are they spending doing that. Discuss how doing data governance can relieve some of that pain. Would you want to trade 15 hours a week of data wrangling for 5 hours a week of doing governance work? You're still gaining 10 hours a week. And this is at the beginning as you're doing the enrichment. As more and more is done, there will be less for you to do, depending on how much new data you're creating. And make it clear that the goal is to make their lives easier. We aren't trying to add to an already full plate. We're trying to take some of this tedious, non-value added work off of your plate, but there's a little bit of a trade-off there. Helps when you hit the right button. Word choice matters a lot, and I really hadn't thought about this when I was starting my what I called roadshow. And I was talking about, we're going to be doing data governance. We're going to be doing data governance. My CFO pulled me aside and said, please don't use the word governance. When I hear the word governance, I think overhead. I think no return on investment. I think tedious, and that's not the case. So verbiage it in a way that is going to be meaningful for your company. Call it, we're increasing data literacy. We're doing data enablement. We called our working groups, we didn't call it a data stewardship working group. We called it a data usage working group. If you say, I'm creating a data usage working group, do you want to join? People go, I'm a data user. Yeah, I think I need to be part of that. But if you call it a data governance or a data stewardship working group, those are more passive words. You want to be active. You want people excited about this. So I would highly recommend that you think about what are your word choices when you're creating the process as a whole and when you are creating your user groups. We had what we called the strategic data usage working group, and that was the vice presidents of all of the different departments. And they actively engaged. They were really into this. And then we had the tactical working group, which is what you would think of as your stewardship group. They're writing the definitions. They're putting the policies in for compliance. They are the ones doing that enrichment exercise that's needed to move forward. Now, this is where I really failed the first time. I told you I'd be very transparent. First of all, I went with a different tool, and I'm not going to name it, but I went with a different tool, and it just didn't work for my organization. But the biggest thing that I did was I had business stewards over here writing definitions for what were critical to them. And then I had the technical stewards were over here cataloging things, and they weren't talking to each other. So having a definition in a glossary, but it's not connected to any of the metadata, that doesn't add value. To have a calculation rule, but you haven't applied it to a report field, again, it adds a little value, but not nearly the return you get when you marry those two up. So my second time around, we had a much different approach where the subject matter expert for a particular area on the business got together with the data engineer that owned that particular feed, and they worked together on enrichment. So here's the metadata, here's the report metadata. What is the definition? How is it calculated? What is the KPI measurement for it? And we gained so much more knowledge, so much more quickly when the two groups worked together. It also helped to kind of break down that IT business silo so that even if it wasn't something that had been defined or enriched yet, the business users felt much more comfortable reaching out to the data engineer to say, hey, I'm trying to find something, but I'm not quite sure where that lives. And they were able to fill in those gaps where previously they were both working in a vacuum. So the more you can bridge that divide, the more information you're going to have and the quicker the enrichment is going to happen. I always do say that really the act of doing data governance is enriching physical metadata with business and compliance context. That's my personal definition, and I keep saying I'm going to trademark that. So what are some quick wins? Let's face it, data governance, not quick, not a project with an end date, but you're going to be asked to show a return on investment pretty quickly. You're going to be asked, where are we in this process? So here's what I would recommend to get you some quick wins. Start with ingesting the physical metadata. You may not have a business glossary yet. You may only have a few terms defined. But if you ingest your metadata into your catalog right away, you aren't starting from a very intimidating blank page. We had previously tried to do the glossary first, and it's like having writer's block. When you look at a blank page, nothing comes to mind. But if you're looking at a fully fleshed out catalog and we can ingest your metadata in a couple of hours, you're looking at your pipeline and there's context there to it already of how it flows. So working on definitions and calculation rules and compliance policies is much easier than when you're doing it in a vacuum. Complete your lineage stitching. Again, with a tool set like ours, that's done in a couple of 2-hour sessions. And then you can see that full pipeline from source to target and all the way through to your report catalog. I always find that generally business users, they may not know schema table column of where their data is, nor do they probably need to, but they know I trust this one sales report. And there are 5 different versions of a sales report, but this is the one that I trust. So if you can get that report catalog calculated, get that report catalog populated right away, it gives them something to work backward from. I know they start at the end and work back. Your technical users are going to start at the beginning and work forward. But that way they can both meet in the middle, and that's really key. Review your data flows and see if you can find duplicative instances where you're storing the data. Data storage, if you're still on-prem, expensive. If you're still in the cloud, or if you've moved to the cloud, storage isn't as expensive, but if you're querying against that entire database and you're storing things more than one time, your compute cost goes up. So a way for you to cut cost is to find those duplicative storages and eliminate them from your data flow. When I was doing my road show with the different teams, I found that our actuarial department had gone around us to our vendor and asked if they could get the raw feeds themselves, as well as our IT team. Well, the vendor was charging us as if it was a net new feed. That was 100 files a day. That all they were doing was sending it out to 2 different SFTP sites, but they were charging us as if they were creating a whole new feed. It was $100,000 a year I saved just by shutting off those duplicative feeds. So that's a really quick way to show an ROI, is cutting out duplicative data. So I would recommend, once you get the ingestion done, you really interrogate it and say, what do I have? What looks like it's the same as this other feed? And see if there's anything you can shut off or anything that you can eliminate from that duplication of efforts. And ingesting the metadata from your BI tool. Like I said, getting that report catalog, to me, is just as important as getting the catalog of your actual data warehouse or data lake or wherever you're storing the raw and refined data. Because business users are going to be in line with the report side of things. That's what they know and trust. It also prevents people from spending time creating a report that already exists. I don't know about you, but a lot of companies are using the term self-service reporting. I want you to self-service. I want you to be able to go and create your own reports. And in theory, that's great, if you're all on board with the calculation rules. You know, our CFO used to, it would drive him nuts. He'd get one report from sales and one report from finance. They were both a quarterly report. They both had a term, assets under management. Values never matched. And every quarter he'd be like, why don't these values match? Well, because we didn't have defined calculation rules. And sales took out cash on hand because it made their yield look better. And they wanted to look better. So, you know, if you have the rules and if you have a catalog already there so that a person who is trying to self-service can know, does this report already exist? Or can I use an existing one? Or maybe I can make a copy of this and add the 2 fields that I need. But you're still going to save resource time. You're going to save storage cost. And you're going to build consensus on, what are these calculated fields? What is the rule for calculating these different items? To make sure that your sales report and your finance report and your actuarial report and everybody's report that has the same field will have the same value in it. Because I think that's one of those areas that the business really struggles with, is landing on one common calculation rule and definition. So I would say, I've said before in some webinars, you know, doing data governance is hard. And somebody said, well, why is it hard? What, you know, you're ingesting, you're doing some enablement with it. What's hard about this? Some enrichment. It's the cultural change that is hard. I was coming from a company that was 135 years old. This company had more attrition from retirement than from people leaving the company. So when you are trying to be a change agent and driving a new way of doing things, you know, because we've always done it that way is really hard to overcome at times. So how do we do this? How do we drive the cultural change? Add data governance tasks to go live checklists. Before someone can move their changes to production, have any new fields been defined? Have any new calculated fields had calculation rules added to our glossary and our catalog? Make it so that they can't move their changes to production if they haven't done the governance tasks around it. That's key. Add tasks to the project plan, and not just the tasks, but the financial budgeting for that resource time to do those tasks, so that it's part of every project plan. There are very few projects you will do that don't have some degree of a data component. Think about it. We got a new application. What are the fields that are going to come in? There's data. We have a new marketing campaign. What data are you using for that? People talk about all these projects. How do I connect that to data? How do you not connect it to data? Every project you do has some degree of a data component. Put it in the project plans. Make sure that everyone understands this is a business as usual change. This is not a project with an end date. I about came out of my seat the first time somebody said, when is the data governance project going to be done? I said, when we stop creating new data. I mean, at the end of the day, you are constantly going to be you're going to be replacing systems of record. You're going to be replacing systems of engagement. You're going to be upgrading your website. You're going to be doing new marketing campaigns. There is always going to be a need for new data governance tasks and people plugged into those things. And gamify it. The more you can gamify doing data governance to get started, to get people engaged in it. We have usage analytics in Collibra, so you can see how many people have gone into the tool this week compared to last week. Or it can go from comparing one day to a prior day all the way up to 1 year to a prior year. So you can see who's using it. You can see who's not. I like to say there's a combination of carrot and stick that you need to use with this. So we would challenge departments. Who can create the most assets that get approved this quarter? And that team would get a reward. Or sometimes we would do a spot bonus, like whichever person proposes the most new terms that get accepted this quarter gets a $250 spot bonus. It's not a huge amount of money, but we would publish that in the company newsletter. So they're getting some extra money, they're getting some extra recognition. And for those people that were actually tapped to be these specific data stewards, we added that to their annual goals. They needed to attend at least 80% of the stewardship meetings, and they needed to propose a certain number of definitions and assets, and they needed to participate in the voting process of approving those. Otherwise, it impacted their annual salary increase. So that one could be carrot or stick, depending on how engaged they stayed. But those are some ways to drive that cultural change. Once it's really rooted, then it just becomes care and feeding and maintenance. But to get people really started, the more you can gamify it and make it fun, have some activities, do something big around kicking it off, the more you're going to get people engaged. Now, Collibra has accelerators within their tool that really can help you to drive these initiatives that we just talked about that are the quick wins. So we have automated business and technical lineage. So when you do your ingestion and do that stitching, you're going to be able to see the business lineage side of things and the technical lineage side of things. Our technical lineage harvester actually pulls the code that's underlying in your data pipeline. So you can see transformations. You can see that there's a concatenation from address line 1, 2, 3, city, state, and zip into one field that's full address. You can see all of that with the underlying code. That makes it really easy for people to understand how the data is coming in, what is happening with it. I would also say it's a great accelerator for anybody who's doing a migration. You make sure you're not orphaning any of those data assets, any of that metadata, by forgetting to move it or by changing the way that that transformation is happening. You can make sure that you're not breaking anything from the business by using this tool. So that's really key. We have profiling and data classification that's done with machine learning. So when you ingest, our tool will look and say, this looks like a social security number. This looks like an email address. And it will give you a percentage of confidence so that you can say, if it's 80% confident, go ahead and approve that. If it's anything less, I'm going to go in and manually look at it. But each time you tell it yes or no, it's learning. So if you bring in metadata from a different source, but you have a specific format, for instance, for your account number or customer ID, it's going to recognize that in the future and apply it for you. So that's going to save you a lot of time. That's also really helpful in identifying the PII, that you need to identify in order to properly protect it and to be in line with whatever privacy law has come down the pipeline in the last 2 weeks, because we all know it's changing very rapidly. All these different states are putting forth their own versions of this. Our data quality tool has adaptive rules. You don't have to write specific rules. You can set our data quality tool over your database and allow it to profile and learn about your data. I was aggressive and implemented catalog and quality at the same time, because in my mind, if I have stewards sitting down writing definitions already, I might as well have them also writing some data quality rules. How do I know if this is right? 2 birds, 1 stone. But I found I didn't really need to sit down and write a lot of data quality rules, because I just let the tool tell me what it was finding. Day 1, I set it over our customer table. I didn't know what I was looking for per se. I just wanted to see what it would find. And it threw something, a shape error. And I was like, what's this shape error? Had no idea. I open up the screen. They found social security numbers in the last name field in our data warehouse. Now, it was a very simple data entry error. Somebody was typing in a person's application and they hit tab to move over to the social security field, and it didn't fully register. But had we not found that the day that we found it, we literally would have been sending out someone's policy information with first name, last name, social security number on their envelope. So day 1, this tool paid for itself. So I was astounded and really upset that that was possible. But if you think about it, a lot of us have older systems of record that maybe don't have as many controls in them as you would expect. So being able to identify that right away, I never wrote a rule. I never told it, tell me if there are numbers in the last name field. It honestly wouldn't have occurred to me to write a rule like that. But the adaptive rules can sit over top of your information and tell you more than you ever knew about your data. And you don't have to know which rules to write. It will start to tell you if your standard deviation is drifting. It will start to tell you if you've got outliers where the min and the max are being broken. And you can make those rules more broad or more narrow as you get in there. But the idea that this can accelerate that journey, and really our tool can eliminate 80% of the rules you would need to write yourself. So that was a huge accelerator for us. The automated report catalog with the catalog lineage. And the catalog lineage isn't just here are the fields that we're using in this report. It goes all the way back to the source. So you can follow the entire pipeline all the way through to that final report, which is really staggering for those business users that may want to write a similar report but don't know where that data started. Or they may say, you know, I trust the data from this system, but I don't trust the data from this system. That allows them to see the provenance of all of the data that's in the reports that they're using. In-app workflows. I think the more you can keep people in the tool, the better the adoption and the more it's going to be used to drive that thought leadership. If you think about it, within our tool, you can propose terms, you can approve terms, you can ask for access to reports or data sets that you may need. So we have bidirectional integration with ServiceNow and with Jira. So it can go and create the ticket for you, bring back the ticket number. Another workflow that I used to do that was really key and our auditors loved it was called a refresh workflow. Every Sunday after our maintenance window, I would have the tool re-ingest the catalog from the data warehouse. And it would tell me everything that changed from the last time I ingested. This workflow would. So I would come in on Monday morning and I'd be like, you know, there's this new table and these new columns in it. This table dropped or this column name changed. I would compare that to our change control board tickets the prior week to make sure that nobody had scooched their change into production without having gone through the proper approvals. So it was a great way to A, keep the catalog up to date, but B, also find if I had people going around our processes. So that was really key. And then, like I said, we have the bidirectional integration with your ticketing systems so that you don't have to leave the tool to do any of that work. And I find that that really helps to drive adoption if they can do everything in the tool. Our stewardship meetings, before we had this tool, when we had the other unnamed tool, when we would get together for our stewardship meetings, they were very boring. Because we would sit there, you know, what is your definition of a registered investment advisor? And everybody would agree on what that was. And okay, now we'll move on to the next term. And we all agreed, and we'd move on to the next one. Very, very tedious, very tedious. But when you can do a workflow to approve definitions within the tool, when you do have a meeting and get together, you're only discussing those assets that you have a disagreement on. And it's really interesting to understand why there's this difference. You know, how are you defining this versus how we're defining this? And is that valid? Sometimes there's a good reason to have more than one calculation rule or more than one definition. Case in point for a hospital, length of stay. Well, length of stay, if you're in the ER, is calculated in minutes. Length of stay, if you're in the ICU, is calculated in days. So it would make sense that they have a different definition for those things. But that's something you would want to have an open and lively discussion about before you land on that. If you aren't doing that, and you're just sitting in a room, yes, I agree, you start to get people disengaged. And you start to get them, oh, I have a conflict for this month's meeting. Yeah, no. And you can really cut the stewardship meetings to probably one a month if you use the workflows that are within the application to get all of those approvals and really just meet when you have enough items that need to be hashed out amongst yourselves. So, some helpful resources, and if anyone would like them, just reach out to us. There is a group called CDOIQ. They made an information governance process maturity model. We used this tool. It's a not-for-profit think tank, so there's nobody's particular viewpoint on it. It's just information governance professionals. Now keep in mind, information governance is a little bit more broad than just data governance, so it's going to include your unstructured data, and it's going to include things like e-discovery. Not a bad thing to have a little bit extra scope here, but it has 23 different dimensions of data maturity, and it's got 4 different levels of maturity for each of those dimensions. And what we sat down and did was we read through the definitions and said, where are we now on this particular dimension? But then aspirationally, where do we want to get to? And that's almost more important than the where are we now, because oftentimes you don't need to be a level 4 maturity. You don't need to be the most mature. And sometimes that's cost prohibitive to get to that level. The difference between 3 and 4 costs a lot, but doesn't add a lot more value. So, and we set out in 1 year, where would we like to get to? In 5 years, where would we like to get to? And then we went through our project plans for the year, all projects, and said, on which of these dimensions of data maturity does this project move the needle? And we acquainted each project with different maturity measures. And sometimes it can hit multiple dimensions at one time. You know, there's some around cloud computing, there's around departmental data usage, around enterprise data usage, around enterprise data privacy, internal data risk, external data risk. So there's a lot of different variables to it, but it's a really great tool that really helped us to define where are we, where do we want to get to, and what is the timeline for getting there in the end. And then, as I said, the Practitioner's Guide to Data Governance. These are all business cases that were written by different people in the industry that have actually implemented data governance. So this is not theoretical. It is boots on the ground. What did we do and how did we get there? All right, so perfect timing. Questions?
Mike's not on here, but great talk there by Bobbi. A lot of personal knowledge shared around best practices and experience. You can see that coming through greatly. Any questions in the room?
Thank you. Great conversation. I think you had it on your quick wins slide.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, when you were trying to stand up data governance,
Yep.
was there an expectation that you could do it without any resources? Or was there a desire to start and show the need for scale?
So my first attempt, it was just me, working in a vacuum. The second attempt, I had myself and just 2 data analysts. So it was still not a large team, and actually they're still a team of their leader and 2 data analysts, and then we had the stewards from the different areas that joined in. I feel that it is important to have some degree of resources attached, but if you ask for them all up front, you're just going to get told no. So you have to make the business case. And what I find is if you can get started and show some of these quick wins, and then go back and say, but in order for you to get the full value, here are the roles that I need. I went from 2 data analysts. I was able to then include a data modeler. And they're like, well, what is a data modeler? And I was like, well, both logically, conceptually, and physically, we need to model how we want to group and use and store our data. And so that was the first additional role I got added. Then I got a data architect that was different than the enterprise architect. So I was able to get a few positions added throughout the time. I don't think you need a huge team if you have the business and technical buy-in to give you that stewardship. And again, this is obviously also going to depend on the scale and size of your company. I mean, we were 60 billion assets, so we weren't tiny. But we were able to accomplish what we needed to with a small core team and then a really active group of stewards. I think you also find as you mature, some of your stewards become some of the best evangelists to get others to join in. Our actuarial team was amazing in wanting to get other people involved. So the first 2 actuaries we had started bringing friends to the meetings, and I was all on board with that. If you want to bring friends, feel free. I'll order more pizza. That's the other thing. Feed people. Feed them to come to the meetings. Always a good thing.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak to what the tipping point was for you to, abandon your first vendor and go to a new vendor for the catalog.
Well, it kind of just stopped working. We had bought an enterprise tool, and we were finding that we thought enterprise, it means it's all together in one place. And we found that there were separate logins, separate UIs for the glossary versus the metadata. Well, then they're not talking. You're not getting the value. The data quality module kept breaking. We had the same data quality rules that we ran all the time, and we weren't changing the login passwords or anything, but it would be unable to connect to the metadata all of a sudden. And so it was very glitchy, and we weren't getting the level of support that we needed. And we just felt like this was not the ideal. And I had actually looked at Collibra the first time, and we preferred it, but at the time it didn't have a data quality component, and from our C-suite coming down, that was one of the must-haves. So unfortunately, we went in another direction. By the time I circled back around 2 years later, Collibra now had a data quality component, and it was easier to make that decision. I still went through a full evaluation and looked at Collibra and our top 2 competitors and did full POVs with each. And I just landed on it met both the technical and the business users where they were, as opposed to some of them we looked at where our technical people were like, this is awesome, and our business people were like, I can't find anything in here, I don't speak tech. And vice versa, there were some that were very business user friendly, but it didn't provide the level of detail that the technical side needed. So, it's really hard to eat crow in your job when you've asked people to put up, however many dollars you end up putting up in your budget. But if it's the right thing for the business, you need to do it. And I think if you are the one who calls the stop and makes the change, you get a lot more respect for that than somebody else coming to you and saying, this isn't working and I need you to abandon it. You lose a lot of credibility. When you own it and say, you know what, I made the best decision I knew to make at the time with the information that I had the first time. It didn't work. I need to pivot, and just own that. It reads a lot better.
Any other questions? I got one. I've got
Yeah.
one here. Hand over in a minute. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Question: when you started off, you talked about you went around the organization and identified the subject matter experts.
Mm-hmm.
How did you do that? I mean, how do you know who actually go to in such a big organization, which you've got the number?
So I started with their managers, with all the VPs, and said, who is your super user of data? And then when I sat down with that person, sometimes they were like, yes, I'm the man or woman. And sometimes they were like, oh yeah, I'm good, but you should talk to Kate over here, she's even better. And I would just, as many people as I needed to talk to get the full view, I was willing to do. Thankfully, I had a leader who was very much, she was a Six Sigma Master Black Belt for GE. And so if you know anything about their culture, they are willing to invest the time and the effort in getting it right the first time, as opposed to piecemealing it together and then having to come back and redo. So she was not pushing me on timelines as long as I was showing forward progress.
The next GE guy, I can understand. No, that's great. Front here.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that obviously your first go around didn't go well.
Yes.
How did you tackle that conversation with, I guess, the C-suite on, we didn't get a return on investment on the first time, but let's do it again?
Well, I had to have a very specific plan of what I would do differently, and it wasn't just the tooling. It was, this tool is not working, but my approach wasn't either. And now that I've learned more, here's the approach I would like to take during this implementation and during this go forward compared to what I did last time, which was like working in the vacuums. I had the business over here and I had the technical over here. This time we're going to work on it together. This time we're going to take an ingest first approach as opposed to a glossary first approach. I could also help them to understand that we were able to export the work we had done in the prior tool, so we weren't starting completely over. At that time, we had 8,000 terms that we had defined and approved, but we hadn't connected them to the metadata. So we were able to do one bulk upload of all of those terms. And the beautiful thing was, because the Collibra tool has that machine learning, it would look at the names of our columns and it would look at the glossary definitions, and it started recommending, hey, do you want to connect these two? Yes, I do, thank you. So it made it a lot easier. But having a go forward plan and to be able to tell them what lessons had been learned so that we weren't going to do the same mistakes again. We made all new mistakes, no. We didn't repeat the old ones, but that really helped. And like I said, just being transparent. I find that if you take personal accountability, people don't try to lay blame at your feet because you've already taken accountability. And there's a difference between accountability and blame. So if you own the accountability, it leads to a lot more trust of you in the future. And I meant to say something at the beginning and then I forgot I'm wearing them. I have some medication right now that makes my eyes very sensitive to light. So I'm not just trying to be the data diva here, although I am the data diva. But that's why I'm wearing sunglasses. So no offense intended, it's just the light is really killing my eyes.
You look very cool. Okay. Any other questions? A question at the back there?
Hey, Bobby. Quick question on the competitor side of things, right?
The what side of
The
things?
competitor side of things.
Yes.
So let's say, for an example, you partner with one of the partners, right? And then there is an opportunity where you're going against their own solution set. So for an example, they have their own catalog. And they have their own governance ways of doing things. But still, you are in this midst of partnering with them. How do you handle those kind of situations?
So I usually think about it, you know, there's a lot of what I would call cooperation nowadays. They're a partner, but they're kind of competition. For instance, Databricks has a Unity catalog, and that's great if your entire data ecosystem is in Databricks, but I don't know anybody that can actually say that. Everybody's got pockets of data sitting in other sources. So I like to think of us as the catalog of catalogs. So we can take the micro that you have over here and bring it together to give everyone the macro view. So it's really a matter of better together for most of the tooling that's out there. You know, there are some tools that have ETL and catalog and quality, but really their sweet spot is ETL. Doesn't mean we can't work with them. Doesn't mean you have to rip out the parts that are working for you, but just understand that sometimes bringing pieces from others together is going to give you a better end result, because at the end of the day, you need that holistic view of your ecosystem.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, one at the front there.
Hi. One of the examples that you gave when you started off was that social security number being in one of the fields. So, you know, as you embark on a data governance program, it's best if you could quantify the benefits in terms of ROI, et cetera.
Yep.
Like sometimes things may not be very evident of what business you want to build through quantification. So do you have some recommendations around that?
So if you have a type of system where people have to log hours to how much time they spend doing things, which if you're in a case where you are in a billable hour situation or just a time tracking system, if you can find how much time people are spending, or even if they're willing to give you a quantification of how much time people are spending doing that non-value added work, that's a really great way to start on the ROI side of things. Then lean into the data as an asset side of things around have we increased the productivity of our marketing campaigns, things like that, that you can see what the engagement was previously to now because we are targeting the right set of people. So that's another way. Then there's the data as a liability side of things of, you know, we were inaccurate in a financial reporting document that had to go out and we had to spend hours redoing it. We had to redo tax returns for like 7 different states because we were inaccurate the first time around. So anything around the compliance side of things also is a good way to gauge that ROI. Those are some good starting points.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, Bobbi, thank you so much. Just to summarize my own notes here and just to help everybody just kind of digest what we just learned, which was an excellent session, Bobbi.
Thank you.
Identify the SMEs, you know, go find them, dig them out, you know, and identify them, link it to business priorities. Culture is everything, as we all know, so culture is framing the right words. I remember that from the talk. So framing the right words, the culture side of things. Culture in terms of what you said around having the policing when the gates need to be hard. And when you said that, you know, it can't go into production because it doesn't meet X, Y, and Z. Okay, and having the guts to go put that in place and being strong leadership in policing. So when governance needs to be hard, make it hard. Okay, and have the guts to go do it.
I like that. I'm stealing that line.
You're going to take that line? Okay. And then I think it was an excellent talk on governance, really do. And then tied to personal objectives. Hit your bottom pocket, hit your performance goals in the company, and have the data governance leaders and business leaders or data stewards actually understanding that it's going to affect their personal performance because the metrics have been put in there. I think that was my summary of the talk.
It's got to be measurable. You know, how can I tell you how well you're doing if I don't know how it's going to be measured? So, you know, that's key. If anyone has any other questions or would like to learn more about Collibra, we have some handouts here that Scott has around both the catalog and the data quality module. And I'll be over at our booth right after this. We're number 9 in the hall. And would be happy to have any deeper conversations with anybody who would like to. We also have a webinar series. So the Getting Started with Data Governance, you just got to see series 1. We have one around data stewardship. So we did that one in April. It's on demand on our website if you'd like to see. And September 5th, I'll be hosting the next one, which is Getting Started with a Data Quality Program. And what are the roles and responsibilities? And what does that look like? Where do you get started with that? Because I think it's funny, we have some, you know, maybe 10% of our customers who are like, well, where are we with AI governance? And, you know, they're all the way up here. And then I'd say 60% of the people that I'm talking to are like, I'd really like if I could get people to use Tableau instead of Excel. So no matter where you are in the journey, I would love to talk to you. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.